Well, good morning. Can you guys hear me okay? Everybody having a good morning so far? Pretty good sessions? I'm Jonathan Eisner. I'm with Red Hat, and I'm our Director of Global Cloud Alliances. So thank you all for being here, and really excited about our topic this morning. We really want to talk about what's happening in the federal government in terms of cloud computing in the state of the market. And I'm really excited about our panel. We've got two experts from the industry, and then we've got two leaders in federal agencies, and we can really get some great perspectives, and also hoping to leave some time to have some Q&A towards the end of the session. We've only got about 45 minutes, and a topic like cloud and panel like this, it's going to go fast, but be thinking about some questions that you may have, and time permitting, we'll take some at the end. What we want to talk about, though, is federal cloud computing, what's happening, and the way I think about it is like a bucket of stew, and you've got things like infrastructure as a service and PaaS, and then you break it down a little more, and you start to think about single tenant, multi-tenant, security, compliance, on-premise, off-premise. There's just a lot going on right now, and it's moving really quickly. So with that, excited to get into our topic. And so we're going to start with you. And if you guys just introduce yourselves, and by the way, thank you very much for being here. We're delighted to have you. If you could take a minute to introduce yourselves and tell us about what you're doing in the cloud space. Get a two-parter. One thing the government's doing right. What was that? What's one thing that the government's getting right in cloud, and what's one area that's ripe for improvement?
Okay. Great. So, good morning, everybody. I'm Sarah Mosley. Can you hear me okay?
Mic's on. Mic's on.
It is? Testing. It was on.
There we go.
Okay. Can you hear me? All right.
Turn that on.
It definitely is on, so.
Yeah, this is the best I can get myself.
1, 2, 1, 2. It's not working. Okay. Thank you. Okay, that's better, right? Okay. I'm Mosley. I'm with Department of Homeland Security with Cybersecurity and Communications Organization. Our organization focuses outward, so we're not the internal OCIO shop for the department. We actually work with the civilian agencies, the .gov community, to basically oversee the progress on the cybersecurity mandates, such as Trusted Internet Connection, DNSSEC, continuous monitoring. So a lot of the focus lately has been on cloud and mobile. And part of the reason is, of course, the Cloud First mandate and the FedRAMP mandates that have come out. And agencies are slowly going towards the cloud, but obviously they have some challenges. So I would say, as far as what are some of the positive, and then some of the things that maybe the challenges, they actually kind of are the same. The positive is that from a security perspective, the maturity level in the what I would call the commercial cloud offerings is just not there. And so the agencies have been very cautiously moving to the cloud. So that's a good thing, because they're thinking about the security implications when moving to the cloud. But at the same time, again, they're slowly moving, and therefore the service offerings and the standards aren't there from an operational perspective for them to be able to feel comfortable that they have the visibility and they have the kind of the same type of, I guess, awareness when they do move their data to the cloud. So that's what I would say.
Great.
Good afternoon almost, right? So it's almost lunchtime. But you guys are doing okay because you've got your popcorn, so we'll try to be as entertaining as possible. Todd Myers from NGA is been working in the intelligence community for about since 2007-ish, and working mostly strategic planning and some enterprise architecture components. But as of late, the past two to 3 years, NGA ISAC member, or IC member, following the design principles in the interior. Al-Jurassic and Clapper have outlined from D&I, moving all of our agency assets from a technology perspective into ISAC. And so everything that Sarah just talked about is just a different flavor for us. That's more on the intelligence side, but the same principles apply. So security in the cloud and the paradigm shift of cell level security and how that impacts your planning of how you work with the data has a trickle effect all the way up until the visualization from an NGA perspective, how you would even visualize a typical ArcGIS or GIS analyst that we support across the community. So we're dual-hatted, not only our intelligence community participant, but we're also combat support agency. So we have the full spectrum. So there's also an offshoot or a partner environment called the Joint Integration Environment, GIE, which is led by Dave DeGrees from DoD CIO shop. And that's where the joint maturity or expectation of maturity, jointness has to gain on par, and it's got a ways to go. So I was downstairs and someone asked about cross-domain solutions to the guest speaker, and I thought that was kind of interesting because I hear that question a lot as far as typical questions regarding the current way that we do perimeter defense versus defense in depth, right? So the constructs of open source software and the impact of software-defined X, so software-defined networking, software-defined computing landscape, and the business process that organizations in our side of the house are going to have to align themselves to understand that the moment your organization spins up an instance of a hosted provider like NSA's GovCloud or CIA C2S, there's an impact to cost, which isn't actually allocated to current lines of business today. So there's a whole realm of components, and I think getting a better understanding of how industry can large organizations quantify. It sounds like we have a phone that's probably interviewing. It's probably the speaker. I can't hear you. Right, so I'll just talk about it. So where was I? So there's a maturity level that I don't know if I was to give a rating, and it's just my personal opinion, but I would say we're about 5.5 maybe across. I don't know what your number would be, but based upon where we are today and where we're going towards, and shared hosting environments, collapsing organizational lines of business to follow shared services, getting into Open Geospatial Consortium and API and Universal SDK kits that we're riding against, the collapsing of typical big system integrators to a lot of small integrators that are part of a consortium collaborative conversation. That's going to be a new paradigm for the entire IC and DoD. There are examples of that already kicked off. NSA has been doing this for probably about 6 or 7 years, led by Alexander, to get this going forward. He's instantiated things such as the iCafe, which is a intern cafe to have actual interns come in there and kick the software code down the hall and see what breaks. I think those are fantastic ideas. So I think that probably covers the first question.
That's a great answer.
All right.
Hi, my name's Tom McAndrew. I have a pretty loud voice, so I'll just project here, but this way you can still record it. So I was former military, so maybe that's where I got it. So I'm representing the industry side here. I'll give you a little bit about my background. So I'm a former Naval Academy and spent most of my time in the Navy and DoD on fire control systems, C4ISR, all the different acronyms they have now. After leaving active duty on the Navy, I still support on the reserve side. I focused my time on the commercial side. So in the government, I never really got to go hands-on. As an officer, I really never got hands-on in firewalls or deep in the technology, other than when things broke, and I was ultimately responsible. And so I made the shift to kind of shift out of the government onto the commercial side, and so I spent several years working with banks and healthcare across a bunch of different industry, and now it's interesting because things have come full circle when my value in the federal space is that I know the intelligence community, the DoD, federal government space, and the commercial sector. And so I spend a lot of time with government agencies and commercial industry on what's really happening out there. What do we actually see? So on the coal-fired side, we're the largest assessor in the country for FedRAMP. So we're currently supporting about 53 different cloud service providers. And pretty much all the major ones that you can think of, we're supporting as advisors or on the assessment side. So we have a pretty good pulse of what's happening and what's changing in the industry. When we talk about what the industry is doing well, there's been some really good policies and a lot of good education. So it's amazing how many people I talk to that still are not aware of what the cloud-first policy means, what the requirements are, what the policies and directives that are pushed down by the requires reporting on cloud tech. Basically, you must use cloud if you are using cloud. It must be the FedRAMP control and specialized quarterly up to portfolio stat. That's the high-level view of what OMB is doing. Now, how that's actually being run is a little bit different, so maybe that's where the industry could kind of improve a little bit, but that's happening quite a bit. Because of that reporting that's being pushed up, it's really driving all the agencies, and you've seen this really in the last quarter or two, to drive different CSPs to say, hey, what is your cloud solution, and is that meeting the FedRAMP baseline, where a lot of people don't understand what FedRAMP means and what the requirements are. So as of today, there's over a dozen different folks on the infrastructure side, and there will likely be hundreds of different people in the FedRAMP repository over time that are going to be SaaS, PaaS, and infrastructure service that will change both the way we do security in the federal government and as well may streamline and is already impacting procurement in the federal government.
David? Sure. My name is Blankenhorn, and of course mine's not on either. I'm the Chief Cloud Technologist at DLT Solutions, and I lead our cloud advisory group there. Now, like my fellow panelists here, I actually spent a number of years, started off my career on a now defunct network called the Defense Data Network, which you guys may know part of that is the internet. Started there and then did a number of years in the private sector, large financial, healthcare, those areas, before coming back on the Fed side. So I've got a lot more industry focus and bringing the technologies to the public sector. In terms of strengths, I've been very impressed with, quite frankly, the adoption speed. I know for some people it seems very glacial in terms of adoption of cloud technologies, but I see cloud technologies being adopted much more rapidly than other technologies over the years in the public sector. I think a lot has to do with the pressures the government is having, especially around the fiscal area. So adoption is something that's going really well. I think the work around NIST 1853, the controls that are being revised, FedRAMP, those are all real positives. Some of the challenges that I see right now really revolve around acquisitions. How do we actually do this whole metered service, whether it's a public cloud or even someone else's private cloud within the government? How do I actually do that metered billing across agency to agency or agency to public cloud? And the other thing is I think we've got a massive shortage in people that actually understand the cloud technologies. The more I talk, I mean, there's a huge shortage, and whether it's public cloud technologies or private cloud technologies, people who actually truly understand the technologies that are out there and how to actually implement, deploy, and manage them. I think we have a dearth of those kind of folks right now.
That's great, and we touched on just about everything, but I think we just scratched the surface on so many of the topics that I think we want to cover. And I think one area that is ripe for discussion as a follow-up to kind of what you guys were just talking about, Tom, was around culture, and how is the movement to cloud computing being impacted by existing cultural and by existing culture of the old IT way of doing things, dare I say the old IT way, and existing business processes. And I'm interested in all four of your opinions because we have outside and inside, but I'm particularly interested, Sarah and Todd, on from a inside the federal agency perspective, how would you look at that?
So from the civilian side, I think definitely there is a cultural shift in terms of how really to use the cloud, right? So actually leveraging the cloud rather than looking at it from the traditional sense of just a data center, right? And that I don't think has been really taken advantage of. I think most agencies are just trying to meet the mandate. For cloud first, we got to do it, and then FedRAMP. So with respect to FedRAMP, though, we work very closely with FedRAMP. just because of the kind of the scope of our work. And so there's been a couple occasions where we've been, actually educating the CSPs on some of the policies and the mandates, cybersecurity policies. So, for example, trusted interconnection. The CSPs, all they knew was that there's a FedRAMP control SC7 that that agencies have to route their traffic through their TIC portals. They didn't know what that means. So we had a couple of good discussions on that. But I think it's kind of the education from both sides in terms of how do CSPs help the agencies with all these different mandates that might be opposing. I mean, the cloud and the TIC are two very much opposing mandates right now. So that's been, I think, the biggest challenge is, is just, how we can kind of marry the two together.
That's great. That's great. Todd?
So I've said this at other forums, and I'm going to run through an analogy of actually things that have already defined and been very successful. So if you look at the reason why Amazon was established initially, right, to make sure that they had enough capacity based upon the Christmas buying season. Well, there became a defined mission business model out of that, derived out of that, which then spawned an entire industry of many, many eco-components. Today, that is summarized into the capability of excess capacity into a monetized spot instance economy. That's something that would have dramatic impacts to shared services across the government agencies if we got to a point where the cultural environment understood that if they organized across shared services and understood the entire ecosystem of how they could share those environments, they actually get to reusability, and I wouldn't say over allocation, but they get to a point where they actually have commoditized capacity that doesn't have to be spun up and spinning all the time. So there's that example. But the biggest one I see that really is required. So there's a reason why Apple and RiskBased and Google are going to be around, and I might say Facebook, but it'll evolve. There's a reason why they're going to be around for the next 10 or 15 years. Is because they spent time first on defining their mission business platform and what supports that. They have quantitative Roman columns that define their platform. So it's not about taking IT, as Sarah mentioned, hosting it, because everybody does that. I do that at home, although my wife got a little upset because I didn't let go of the persistent storage, and $400 later, storing my daughter's pictures, I thought it was justified, but she didn't think it was very justified. So there's an evolution that needs to happen. And so there's a partnership, though, I think that OMB needs to expand upon, which is, all right, so if we do this, then that means we need to change how programs and project managers and organizations are graded, how they get their bill assignments, how they get their resources and allocation in dollars, colors of money. There's many colors of money, CIC and DoD. These are all things that actually kind of pop up like weeds, like, well, once we do this, oh, now we have to think about this. So there's a huge cultural evolution that needs to occur that needs to be on the same maturity glide slope as well as, security and those components. So if you're going to remember one thing from my point on cultural, it's making sure that the entire organization and the shared services understand what the defined mission business platform is for your organization.
Yeah, no, I mean, those are great points. And I guess I'd ask y'all's perspective if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the interesting things for me about going across that most strikes me is, and that's why I was looking at this crowd. I can't identify anybody that's in their 20s. Is anyone in their 20s here in this crowd? Got a couple? All right. So this is kind of interesting thing is the first thing that I notice when I go in is there's a huge age difference when I go into. So when I go into commercial organizations and you meet the heads of compliance or different folks, age isn't really as much of an issue in the commercial side. It's more about kind of there's very few 20-year-old GS-15s and 20-year-old admirals, right? We don't do that
because of the way that we've done the organization. So when I talk about a culture shift, one of the things that's very interesting is I see there's two different ones. Those that are younger are very interested in understanding how things work. Right? They don't have 20 or 30 years experience. They're very interested in understanding the fundamentals of the JIE, how the intelligence community works, how we have evolved in the DoD, how we went from doing nothing. It's mind-blowing that we did nothing, and then we had this thing called FISMA, and then we had DIACAP and DITSCAP, and we haven't always had compliance. We just figured things out not too long ago. On a lot of the other folks, we find out that there's a large concern because they don't use the technology. Sometimes they see their daughters are using that tech, those sorts of things, and so there's this natural thing is you cannot bring that cloud into our environment. We can't do that technology because you don't understand the way that we do things. And we see the other folks saying, well, we can, just tell me what the challenges are. So a good kind of basic example that I use is I fly almost every week, and if you remember when they first came out with those millimeter scanners, they used to kind of scan your whole body. There's a whole lot of discussion on privacy, and then they just made a little software tweak where a little green thing flashed up or a red thing flashed up in the general area of your body, right? And that was a technical way of solving some of the privacy issues. And this is what we see happening in cloud is there's a variety of different good technologies that are being brought up where people are taking great ideas and tweaking them, and then trying to overcome procurement issues, which I'm not going to address here, and then some of the security and compliance issues. And security and compliance continue to be some of the biggest issues in the cloud. So the good part is the control frameworks are not any different. So if you look at the way that we've adjusted things, it used to be, the intelligence community now has ICD 503, DoD is going to be shifting to DIA risk management framework at some point, and the government is using the NIST language. So now we have a standard language that all folks within federal agencies, DoD, and intelligence are going to start speaking. That's significantly helping, and we have a standard set of common controls. Now the interpretation of those controls are different, the parameters are different, but we at least are starting to speak the same language, which is really helping drive some of that culture shift so that the guys and the civilian guys can all do that. That's the opportunity that the commercial sector is seeing. So rather than having to create 3 or 5 different solutions now, they recognize if they create a good technology or something, this technology has the opportunity in being used in multiple different environments with a couple tweaks. And so it's really spawning the innovation that's happening right now in the commercial sector and some really, really cool things that are happening. And you're seeing those being deployed and tested at a pace, when you mentioned pace, at a pace much faster than everything else. Great.
So I think culturally, some of the key areas I'm seeing is one is just how to get IT in the mindset and even users in the mindset of consuming IT as a service, not buying a bunch of servers, buying a bunch of assets that can run around. I mean, I'm an old big iron bigot. I mean, I used to love my big servers, my $5 million servers, but those days are past. And I think culturally, we collectively need to get around the idea of consuming these IT assets as a service. And from an IT side, if you're doing a private cloud, how do you think like a commercial cloud service provider? How do you think like Amazon? How do you get in that mindset? How do you get that business framework of providing that your IT infrastructure as a service to your constituents? And as a user of those services, whether you're actually looking at SaaS types of offerings and how do you consume that, or even maybe a PaaS offering when you're a developer, how do you, again, what are the changes there around how you need to actually think differently from an architectural perspective? Because there's different architectural design patterns for cloud than you have in a traditional IT infrastructure. So I think culturally there's some major differences and changes in the way we think about IT.
That's great, and that's really the whole point. And whether an agency is going to build a shared service or a department's going to use a shared service, or they're going to go out to this thing called the public cloud and acquire services from, some of the usual suspects. And these are all coming into play, and at least to what I think is a really important topic, which is around security and compliance and FedRAMP. And so, just by a quick show of hands, how familiar are you guys with FedRAMP? If you are, if you could just so I can get a baseline, okay? So pretty good. So I definitely want to go down the line here. I have a little blurb, so let me just make sure that we're all on the same sheet of music. So FedRAMP standardizes the approach to security assessment, authorization, and continuous monitoring for cloud products and services with a do once, use multiple times framework. And the whole idea is it's supposed to reduce cost, time, and money so that agencies don't have to do separate assessments and that they can use a singular framework. And then you add in OMB. When this was talked about, OMB's come out and said by June of 2014, cloud service providers need to be, have hit that FedRAMP milestone. So there's this push to, within the government, to push the federal agencies to use third-party cloud service providers, and FedRAMP's at the heart of that around security and compliance. So, with that, is it working? Is my question. Well, David, we'll go this way. But is it working? And from your vantage, is it widely understood? Do people know what to expect, et cetera?
So, first of all, I think that from a high level it is working. I mean, we currently have 9 vendors who've actually been to the gauntlet. They have their provisional ATOs or agency ATOs. I think the reason why there aren't more, and again, this guy is doing the auditing, so you can probably talk more about that, is most of the commercial cloud providers are not being incubated in the federal public sector world. They're coming from the commercial world. So we speak a completely different language on the public sector side, that you walk into some of these big commercial cloud providers, they just don't understand the lingo. They're learning this completely different model that they're not used to. It's taking them longer than they would otherwise expect to, because they have to go through all 290 some odd control objectives and document all this stuff ad nauseum and actually get through the whole audit. It's a massive undertaking for these companies to actually go through. So I do think it's being successful so far. I mean, 9 vendors is a good testament. You mentioned 50 some odd in the pipeline. They're on their way. Now, the real measure of success, though, isn't how many vendors do we get into the FedRAMP program. It's how many agencies are actually using those packages once they're in there. And I have no visibility into that, so I can't say that 30 agencies are using those packages. That, to me, is the real metric for success. And I have to see those metrics in terms of who's actually using these packages. So that's really what this is about, is the reuse of the packages, not getting vendors into the pipeline or getting those ATOs issued. It's about who's using them and how many people are using them.
Great. So I'll just add on that for those of you that aren't familiar with the process. So one of the things that's very unique about FedRAMP is in a typical assessment that we do in a DoD, IC, or a federal agency, when you do that assessment, it stays within the agency, and there's no way for other agencies to see it unless they request it. Within FedRAMP, all the repositories, the system security plan, the security assessment results, the pen test, the scan, the policies and procedures, those are all publicly available for, I wouldn't say publicly, but they're available to the government community. So anywhere the .gov or .mil has access to it. So first of all, it's an awareness that if you're in the government and you want to see it, you can see it. You just have to request up to the agencies, and you're going to see something different. So most system security plans, well, I'm going to give you just my personal view, experience that I've had. I'm not speaking on behalf of the DoD here for sure. Most of the system security plans, SSAs that I do, have been pretty much garbage. They're all the same, written by the same people, and they really don't tell me anything about the system. I tell you the system security plans for these cloud providers, if you haven't read one, night and day. The system security, average system security plan that I'd historically seen in industry, around 100 pages. Average system security plan to see for cloud providers, 700 to 800 pages, 1,200. And this is just the plan, not the policies or procedures. So when you're on AC2, regular, access control, I usually see the organization has access control, manages it with Active Directory, 7-character passwords. Well, I know you're not using Active Directory for other components, you're not using it for this. There's a variety of different components that people are using. That's explained in much more detail. Configuration management, another thing, CM2, CM6. We designed DISA STIGs or CIS benchmarks. A lot of those don't exist for half of the technology out there. What are you actually doing for those? How are you actually documenting the exception? So if you guys see these system security plans, for the CSP's credit, they've had to create something that we haven't historically done before. And one of the challenges is they're hiring industry guys to help them with the packages, and they're thinking of these standard ways of doing it. And it's monumental. When you see the amount of documentation that's happening, it's great. The good part is that's building a strong foundation for people to leverage. So we took one of the cloud service providers, took their package, leveraged it for DoD assessment for under $20,000 within less than 2 weeks, able to leverage that whole package and ATO within the DoD.
How much does it cost for a cloud service provider to go through, try to get an ATO? I mean, is there a range?
Yeah, you can, so I could probably say the general range that these organizations are paying are probably between
$100K to $300,000, right, to get through. So that's kind of one of the challenges. The good part is once, and it varies. I mean, we know organizations spent millions of dollars just doing architectural changes. And one of the biggest issues for the commercial sector in cloud is in the government, we're rack huggers and we like our boxes, right? We want to look at our systems and define these boundaries, and that's how we live. And remember, cloud is based on leveraging technology, reducing cost. So there is no way to kind of draw a box when you deploy something within a cloud. So explaining things like SC7, SC17, the way that we do accreditation boundary or authorization boundaries are very different in the cloud. And so it's changing, changing the model where we cannot just get you a defined list of assets, or how do you deal with an asset list when it's changing dynamically, right? I have 1,000 assets now, I have 1,200 now, I have 900 now. We're not built to do dynamic assessments and those things, and so that's the shift that is a little bit different than this. But I think Ron Ross spoke, and as we talk about the RMF, but that's the shift of the government from the accredit and forget it mentality. You go through all this stuff, get it accredited, forget about it for 3 years, and bring it back up to this authorization and assessment mentality, which is get it through and make continuous tweaks as it goes through, integrate continuous CDM stuff as we have this, and find a way to automate and engage value. I mean, we're able to do things in cloud that we cannot do otherwise, and it when it's done correctly. And that's the challenge, is we keep trying to understand how do we do it correctly, and what are the lessons that the leaders have going on. And we have now 5-7 years of experience of people using cloud across all different areas, and we're running into similar challenges that we've created a variety of different solutions around them.
That's great. Todd, is FedRAMP working? What's your perspective?
So I'm not going to speak too much on the FedRAMP because, and I'm absolutely not going to go into the security parameters that I deal with in the IC side. But I ask him. But I would say that the implications of provisioning dynamic state is an environment that the government needs a lot of help from industry on. The moment you declare a state of something in a dynamic eco, it only lasts for that particular point in time. The moment it changes, it impacts everything. And I'm talking about the data analytic landscape, not just the, so my principle is that all computed infrastructure just is utility power. How it's been positioned needs to be ATO'd. The moment I get into the 3 levels of logical abstraction from those physical environments, now I'm in a different state dynamic conversation. And I don't believe that we're approaching it with the amount of rigor, be prepared for things such as insider threat and other components that could potentially have issues with that. So it's not a direct one-to-one relationship of having the way you ATO your physical infrastructure, and even if you provision services off of the physical infrastructure, like any provider that would give you a provisioned dedicated server, that still can change, and that state can change. And the moment you get into shared services and shared object stores, it's a whole different conversation. So the impact of dynamic state from a provisioning environment needs a lot of work.
Great. Sorry, any thoughts?
Sure. So I think just what hasn't been actually mentioned. One is the FedRAMP staff. There's a handful. Really, it's Maria, Matt, and a couple of ISSOs. So I mean, obviously, with the amount of backlog, there's going to be some time before there's going to be more certified, I guess, more packages out. But they are working at full speed.
Yeah.
One thing to note is that the FedRAMP certification is not just for commercial cloud services. It's for any cloud services that the agencies have. So if you have an internal cloud environment, it has to be FedRAMP certified. So while, is it working? Yeah, I mean, it's going to have to work. That is the only thing we have right now in terms of some type of standardization and, economies of scale and things like that. So it will, I think it's just going to take some time to mature. So that's I think the most important thing. And then again, that education of the CSPs in terms of drawing that boundary, because the boundary, while from a cloud environment doesn't make sense, they are doing it. Amazon's doing it. Microsoft's doing it. So I mean, you have definitely providers that understand that this is how the government needs to be able to do it. And one additional thing to mention, one of the biggest challenges is incident response. Incident response in a multi-tenant environment, how does that work? So FedRAMP is working with US CERT, with the CSPs, to come up with an incident response procedure.
And I just want to kind of add on that, I would say today, the backlog is not at the GSA, the PMO office that manages, right? The backlog is in getting these cloud providers ready to begin their assessment, right? Most of them do not have 700-page system security plans. Most of them don't have a basic understanding of saying, I get it, your cloud, your boundary's different, explain it to me clearly, so I understand it. Well, you market 3 services here, but your SSP shows 7 services here, but then I look at your data layer and there's 3 different things. So, it comes into a variety of different things, but we're figuring it out. I mean, hey, you noticed multiple agencies are doing this, as you mentioned, right, whether it's public or private cloud, it has to be done. Everyone has to use 3 PAOs. You could just use the goals of independent assessment. So the days of having somebody deploy the cloud, document the cloud, and then assess the cloud are over, right? You want to start doing some sort of independence and making sure that that's some independent, and that's how you get the level of trust. So that's some of the things that we see here, happening right now, and it's exciting. I mean, you're seeing this adoption. I mean, just noticed today, I think the Army just released. They've got 50,000 seats for Office 365 and for Google for email services. For those that can't do it, use the standard mail services. So cloud is being used. It's being used in a variety of different ways, and ultimately it's up to the end users and stuff that will drive it. And I can tell you, the demand is not being driven from the top down. Demand's being driven by the end user, and particularly as you get a younger workforce in, they are used to accessing things. I mean, I have stronger security controls on my personal email account than I have in most of my government.
I mean, from a technical perspective, we'll bring your own device thing. I mean, that was led by a more youthful, population of employees that weren't happy with the status quo.
Yeah. And I'll give you a couple examples like that. Like on the mobile thing, we see, like you were mentioning, some of the areas. I mean, there are things around like geotagging that we be deployed in certain areas. Mobile devices can change classifications from classified to unclassified. We're trying to understand what the issues are and then just throw a bunch of different smart people at it and come up with different technologies and take a risk-based approach to see whether that'll happen.
That's great. A quick time check. How are we doing? 5 minutes? Just scratching the surface. I want to see if there are any questions from the audience. I think we have about 5 minutes. So I've got, please, if you have a question.
How are you guys working to solve the problem of missions? Like, we have a file, we put that out there, I don't care whatever it says, put it out there.
I'll let you guys tackle it.
Okay, so from
That's a roll.
Obviously, I'm not talking from half of OCIO, so just to make it clear, this is, what we've seen with the civilian population. Yes, when let's say, the CIO says, well, I'm going to just go ahead and put, whatever data in the cloud, and they can access it however the users can access it however they want. That's what it's for, right? It is a risk-based decision. At the end of the day, your DAA is making that risk-based decision. So we've had this, we've had these conversations with the agencies and said, well, that doesn't suit our mission need. We can't do security, we can't do trusted internet connection and be in the cloud. It just doesn't work that way. Okay, that's a risk-based decision. And guess what? How NSS and OMB rank kind of priorities in terms of security. Trusted Internet Connection, Continuous Monitoring, and PIV, to the CAC card, are the 3 top priorities. So the agencies are going to get beaten up on things like that, right? So, but at the end of the day, it's a risk-based decision. And to that extent, when the agencies go through FedRAMP and they get their FedRAMP certification, doesn't mean necessarily that they're following SC7, which has to do with, with the way you're routing your traffic, right? So it's all about how the DAA wants to take on the kind of the justification for it.
Yeah, I refer to that as architecture by mandate, as opposed to architecture based on requirements. And typically the best answer is just say no, but to Sarah's point, you go through the design, you throw out the risks and say, okay, DAA, CIO, are you willing to live with this? I mean, it's your job. It's your signature on the line. Let's question the DAA, in which case I'm really sorry. But ultimately it's a risk-based decision. And all you can do is lay the facts out and say, look, these are the requirements of the application, this is the capabilities of the platform, these are the exposure points, your call.
I just want to kind of add, I mean, that's part of the goal of all these things are not to establishment. It's all about, federal risk and authorization management program, right? The risk management framework, all of this, these are basically tools to enable the commanders or DAAs to make their decisions. The challenge that we've historically had, and I'm guilty on the security side, is we typically say no. We typically say, you can't do this, and so our job is not to say no, our job is to say, well, these are the risks. This is what you can and can't do, and to make sure that we educate them on the risks. And that's kind of the shift that we have to do on the security side, which is go from people that just say you can't do things. They got limited ability to kind of continue to work here. What we're looking for is people to say, why can't I do that? Help me understand the risk so I can make a decision of whether I want to do that or not. And that risk-based process, maybe to your point, Jonathan, of really what's happening is that is we're shifting from all guys have FS3 binder kind of mentality into real risk management, and that's it's not happening fast, but it's happening now.
Any other questions?
Okay.
Oh, thank you.
Earlier, it might have been downstairs, they talked about the cost effectiveness of the cloud. Do you achieve that if you go to a private cloud as well?
Okay. So the question is it more cost effective to go private cloud versus public cloud? Is that
No, do you still achieve the cost effectiveness if you go to a private cloud versus a public cloud?
Is there still a cost?
Yeah, I've seen models justifying either way, and I think the reality right now is, having been one of those Gartner TCO kind of people in a past life, I've yet to see a comprehensive ROI TCO analysis of public versus private that actually took all the variables in play. So I've never seen a report. I've seen a bunch of people with some spreadsheets saying, yes, this is cheaper, yes, this is, the reality is I've yet to see a comprehensive model that actually does model it out correctly from an overall cost perspective.
Yeah, something. So, looking at it from an operational perspective, I used to be a Department of State, so looking at how many different bureaus and different organizations would have their own servers, their own applications that they would host, and looking at it actually moving it into a cloud environment internally, it still would actually be much more cost-effective than it was for us.
Yeah, the shared services model can still say, especially if you can actually get multiple programs and parts of the agency involved.
I mean, and the kind of the distributed, and the number of, just even thinking about the number of folks that had to actually manage those, administer the servers and everything. So from that perspective, and then also just, leveraging the cloud, elasticity, even within internally, it still should, I don't know if anybody's actually done ROI on it, but, it would make sense.
So my take is, from a commercial versus private, I think the verdict is still out, and I think part of the problem there is when we design applications or architectures, we always design them based on peak workload. So you always see these Gartner reports about 80% underutilized assets or 90%. The reason why is we're forced to do that from an architectural perspective because we have to design the overall architecture based on peak workload. We didn't have that scalability, fungibility, elasticity in traditional on-premise architectures. I can guarantee you, in your shared services model, you're going to see savings over the current model today, and that is everybody has their own little server they can wrap their arms around. That model is just not going to save any money. If you didn't go the shared services model, you won't save money.
I've seen some, I love that question, and I've seen some studies and some other things that the cream, the nirvana, based on workloads and securities and policies, and taking in all the things that are in place. So it's a really, really good question. I think we're kind of at the end. but I want to just finish up by taking a theme that I really like that Dave actually used this morning with a lightning question. I just kind of go down the line, starting with you, Sarah. If there was one thing that either was said or that you were thinking, tweet out, what would that be?
Protecting the data. I mean, what bottom line, what it comes down to is making sure the data is secure. How are you doing? So.
Got it. Todd?
For me, it'd be what is your mission-defined business platform?
I guess I'll kind of echo Sarah's. I would just change it by saying, defense in depth is dead. It's not about multiple controls. We have to really focus on protecting the data and change the way that we do things now.
Explore the options, learn the technology, see what's out there. It's iterating rapidly, so go out, challenge yourselves, challenge people who work with you, challenge the SIs, go through this technology and how to bring that to bear.
Great. Well, I think we're out of time. Thank you, and let's give a round of applause for our panel. Great.